Welcome to the Rebranding Christianity podcast, a space for people who are interested in expressing Christianity in a way that might be closer to what Jesus intended, a brand of Christianity that's known for the type of love that Jesus modeled for us. But before we talk about what the Jesus brand of Christianity is or how we as Christians so easily get off brand, we need to ask, is it really okay to call Christianity a brand? Is that helpful terminology or is it irreverent? What does the word brand even mean? We're going to address these questions in this episode of Rebranding Christianity. My name is Cindy Park.
And I'm Greg Holmes. Today we are continuing our conversation with Jeff Jones and Mike Hogan, co-authors of the book Rebranding Christianity, When the World's Most Important Brand Loses Its Way. It's that book that launched this podcast. And we've gotten to know Jeff and Mike over the last couple of episodes, but today we're going to start jumping into some of the contents in the book. And Mike, I want to start with you. We heard a lot of your story this last time, and we ended the episode just talking a little bit more about the word brand. And so without repeating all of that, but just kind of catch us up a little bit, like when you, as a person who spent your career building brands, when you use the word brand, what do you mean?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So first, I think I mentioned this last time, but I just acknowledge, I know that for some people, branding conjures up images of sales gimmicks and so on, and that's true, but that's not what I mean when I talk about it. I'm talking about, branding done well. So first, what do we mean by brand? Brand is all of the various associations or emotions or feelings that come up when you hear that name. So if you think about a brand like Apple or Porsche, there's a product there, right? There's a computer or a phone or a car or whatever, but the brand is that and everything else, right? And it's so important, all of these other things that it means in our life. Second point I'd make is that the brand is really a promise. So fundamentally, the branding is all of these things, but it comes down to what is the promise, what are they promising you and why is it important? And if they keep those promises right, then the trust grows and the brand grows. Some of these promises are small, right? I can get a Domino's pizza in 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. Not that important, but if I'm really hungry and I don't have a lot of time, it's pretty important. But think about a brand then like Children's Tylenol. Mm-hmm. Okay, so your baby's sick, you're trusting this brand to reduce the fever and help your kid feel better. That's actually pretty important stuff. Or think about a brand like Xanax. Maybe you found that taking this prescription is necessary for you to even live a normal life. So it's not trivial stuff. These are some pretty big promises. And then the third thing I would say here is that brands are all around us, right? We know a lot of familiar brands. It's Levi's, it's Google, or whatever. But there's some other things. The Red Cross is a brand, at least in my lexicon, the Red Cross is a brand. The Catholic Church is a brand. In fact, I would say these are two really powerful brands that make really big promises. So what I've spent a lot of my career doing is working with brands like this, helping them to make and more importantly, to keep the big promises that matter. Okay,
Mike, so let's dig just a little bit deeper. Can you help us to understand the difference between a brand and a product?
Sure. And that's actually really important to the book as well, because so the brand is all these emotions and associations that go with the name, but the product typically refers to that product or that service, the thing that you actually get or experience. And so the one way to think about it is, if I go to a restaurant, I can have all sorts of associations of it. Maybe it makes me feel elegant to eat at the restaurant or whatever, but the experience that they deliver is, the food and the service. If they have a product problem, bad food or bad service, that makes me unhappy, which ultimately affects the brand. Mm-hmm. In fact, you could make the argument, if you wanted to, that Rebranding Christianity is not really the best title for the book. You could say, the brand Christianity is well established. It was established by Jesus 2,000 years ago. Yes, we need to clarify that, but you could argue that what we really have today is a product problem, right? It's not that there's anything wrong with what Jesus promised or he needs a new ad campaign or anything like that. It's that the product we're delivering, and I know this is offensive to people to think of it as a product, but if the product is the experience that people have with churches and Christians, the problem is that we're not living out the brand promise in terms of the quote unquote product that we deliver. It's that we're supposed to be the most loving people, and we're actually sometimes kind of mean. A lot of people would call that a product problem.
Yeah. I think that's a very good distinction, because we are not the only ones calling attention to the fact that perceptions of Christianity have diminished dramatically in America. And I know that within a lot of Christian circles, there are kind of their own versions of rebranding conversations, but are mostly around packaging and communication. And what's we need a better motto, we need a better ad campaign, we need like those types of things. And so when most people think of the word branding, I think that we think of packaging and marketing of a product. You're using it to include the product and the experience that we have when people interact with the product. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like the point that you're making there, Greg, because, as a brand consultant, and I've had this experience a lot going into companies and brands and talking to them, and typically the first place they want to go is, advertising. We're gonna slap a new and improved label on it and do some new advertising, and we're like, okay, but the data says that your product's not very good. The data says that your competition tastes better or is lower priced, or the data says that people don't like your service. And so, and there's lots of good examples of Holiday Inn's a good example. They did this about 10, 15 years ago. Domino's Pizza is a great example of it, where they had massive product problems, but it wasn't until they really got serious about it and said, like I always say as a marketer, I'd say, for goodness sake, let's make sure the cookie actually tastes good before we spend a bunch of money trying to get people to taste it. Because why would I invite a bunch of people to come to my restaurant or a hotel if I know that it's dirty inside and the experience is going to disappoint people? And so I worry a little bit if it's just a packaging thing. What's the point of inviting people back to church if we're not going to be more loving?
Yeah. Yeah, you can't fix with communication something that's not a communications problem.
Exactly.
So I just want to go back to something, though. But the church and Jesus followers, the gospel message, scripture, that's all been around for 2,000 years. Church has been growing and thriving in the past 2,000 years. And so, but what we're talking about, the way that we're talking about Christianity as needing a rebrand is so new and different. So what's the benefit of thinking of Christianity and the church as a brand? And why do we need to do that now if it's been around for 2,000 years?
Yeah, I think it's to your point. We're not proposing to change the brand or what the brand's about. And it'd be interesting to hear Jeff's thoughts on this as well. I think for me, what I would say is it's more perspective than anything else. It's sort of saying, gee, I never thought about it that way. And as a consultant, for example, I've had lots of examples where we go into companies and they're very internally focused, right? They're looking at their own data or frankly no data. And if somebody, disagrees with them, they tend to, disregard it or be hostile to it or whatever. And sometimes what you have to do is confront people with the reality. And the reality might be, taste test results or net promoter scores or which I guess we'll talk about later, but or whatever. And really get that. So that for me, it's a perspective, it's an analogy to hopefully get people to look at the situation a little bit differently, externally as opposed to internally, and say, you know what, we really do have a problem here, and the problem isn't them and our messaging, it's us and what we're actually delivering.
And I think this is unique. If you think of it as a brand, like it's a unique. Christianity is unique because we have such a strong founder who has such a clear brand that he passed on to us to manage. And it makes me think a little bit of my dad was a founder of a small company, and it was a very technical company that I could have never taken over, so somebody else did that. But if I had tried, I would have totally mushed up the brand. I mean, it would have gone from a respected, what you can count on with Medtherm Corporation, the National Institute of Standards base their standards off of that. But if I took it over, the National Institute of Standards would be like, what the heck? Because I'm not detail oriented. I'd be like, yeah, it's close enough, but you can't do that with something as technical and specific as what he was involved in. And to me, there's an analogy there because the founder passed on, he started the divine mission. He passes it on to the church and says, this is how people will know you're my disciples. If you love the way you've seen me love, that's your deal. That's how people should think of you. That's how people know. And if the founder is clear, but if we are not, if we've kind of mushed it up as we've taken the brand, that's on us to return to the brand that the founder started and say, oops, we've got a brand problem. It's a perception problem, product problem, all kinds of things, right? But we've got to go back to the founder, to the founding, everything that founded the church, and start getting that right. Because essentially nobody would connect us anymore with the original brand that gave birth to this thing.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's on us.
Mike, you used a phrase in the earlier episode, and I think you've used it already in this episode as well. You said brand promise, which sounds like a really important thing. I'd love to hear from you just kind of a definition on what do you mean by brand promise, and why do those matter?
Yeah. So like we talk about, brand is all of these things, right? Associations, emotions, and so on. But at the core of this is a promise. And brands in a lot of ways are sort of shortcut, right? When I go to the store and I'm looking for something, I'm like, okay, well, I need this kind of flavor or this kind of quality or this kind of price or this kind of nutrition or whatever. And I just see a brand and it says, whatever it says. It says Oreos. And I know all of that.
I want to stop you real quick. So for people that are leery of the whole word branding, and it's like, why can't we just live in a world where there's no branding? We probably don't want to live in that world.
Yeah.
There's probably a lot of benefits that we have, which would be, it's an interesting thing to think about, but sorry.
No, that's let me take that one first here, because it's a really good question. So I would say that, first of all, I think brands matter because they play a really important role in people's lives. And they actually help us, make it easier for us to navigate the world that we live in. Now, I realize that sounds like super aspirational for this word branding, but just kind of bear with me. I'll give you 2 examples, right? So imagine, to your point, if every time you went to the store to buy cereal or soap or whatever it is, there weren't any brands there. There's
just a list of ingredients.
Just boxes on the shelf. Super confusing, right? So how in the world would you, every time you went to the store, you'd basically have to start from scratch and say, what am I looking for? What's here? How do I make my list? It would be really confusing. So brands save us a lot of time. Now that's sort of a practical, let's call it lower level kind of benefit, but still important. Secondly, on a much, much deeper level, on an emotional level, brands actually help us to decide who we are and communicate that to other people. And I don't mean this in a shallow way, right? I think of this as like what's on your T-shirt. Okay, you'll notice I'm wearing a Nintendo T-shirt today. We don't just buy the brand. We want to tell others about our affinity and our shared values. So, a Nintendo shirt may tell people, hey, I want to be seen as a gamer or at least a person who loves fun, right? But a Habitat for Humanity shirt might be a public signal about my belief or concern for fair housing or the importance of volunteering, right? Another example, if I don't have one, but if I had a Marie Kondo tidying up T-shirt, that would be probably saying something like, I really want you to see me as a minimalist or an anti-materialist. So, each of these brands is promising something. They have a set of values, and a lot of times we use the word badging. We're badging ourselves and saying, I share these values, and they help me to, number one, they help me to know who I am. A lot of people find identity in things. I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan, I'm an Ohio State fan, I'm a, God forbid, University of Alabama fan. All these things can be true, but it also helps me to find other people with similar things. Like if I said to you, how many people do you know who like to be thought of by what kind of car they drive? I drive a Jeep. I'm an outdoorsy person. I drive a Tesla. I'm very, technology forward. I drive a Maserati. I'm a, car snob or whatever. Or, maybe, as a Christian, maybe you have a Jesus fish on your bumper. Probably don't nowadays, but in the past you might have wanted to have that. So,
and if you do, by the way, just don't drive slow in the left lane. That's all I ask. Exactly. But sorry, Mike. Yeah,
I want to to interrupt you, but I remember reading a stat. This was several years ago, and I can't remember. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like 80% of basketball shoes that are sold never see a basketball court.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a similar number of like 80% of four-wheel drive vehicles never leave the pavement.
That's right.
So there's something about those products that say that say more about the person who's purchasing it and what, the image that, than the practicality of it, which is super interesting, which is, I think, is related to what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And it's yes, if we want to be cynical, we can think of it as presenting some sort of an image that's not true to other people, but that's not really the case. There's lots of people who find an expression of values and community in this, and in the same way, a shorthand, it's, same thing, like rather than, trying to sum up all these values that I might have about making the world a better place or whatever, I just wear a Habitat shirt, and that and it also, frankly, it also holds me accountable to a set of values. Jeff, you mentioned if you have a Jesus fish, don't drive slow in the left lane, and that's true. But it is also true when I put some of these things on, I am making a public statement about who I am, and I have to behave in a way that's consistent with that. So I'm signing up for something, if you will.
Yeah. And is that related then to the original question around brand promise?
Yes. Yes, it is. I think, for a brand promise, I think it's at the core of, we talked about brand as all of these things, but at the inside, it's what are we promising you? So a couple of examples, right? So Starbucks, right? So Starbucks, what's the product? They sell coffee. But by the way, I don't really drink coffee, and I'm super jealous of the whole Starbucks experience, right? It's a cool place to go, and they've got places to sit, and you can sit and meet people and talk, and it smells good, and so on. And I always felt like I'm missing something out. So, or if you think about Apple, for goodness sake, they sell phones or computers, but what they're really promising you is not only just friendly technology, but unleashing your creative potential, sort of be all that you can be, right? Nike, right? Just do it. They sell shoes. Now, granted, they made a lot of money convincing us all that we need a different set of shoes for everything that we do. But what they're promising you is that, it's just do it. We can all perform our best. And so these are things that are really important. And so same thing, like if I'm going out, let's think about that person who says, I'm not really an athlete. I can't do very much. I'm not working out or whatever. And maybe they find some inspiration in that, what Nike's doing. And so they go and do something. Maybe not at a highly competitive level, but a lot more than they would have done. So I think a lot of people find meaning and purpose in those brand promises. And it's something that's important to us. And then there's some sort of connection, right, between what does the product actually do? Like I think we can all see a connection between what an iPhone does and unleashing your creative potential. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit harder to see the connection, for example, when you're looking at the cologne and perfume ads around Christmas. Okay, it's pretty hard to see how that it's like Axe deodorant. I'm not sure it really is going to do anything for me, but there's a promise there. But it's not easy, right? So if you think about, we've all had this, right? You have a friend who keeps making promises but breaking them, right? I'll be there, and they don't show up, and so on. Well, that's with the brand. It's great to say we make a big promise. Well, why doesn't everybody make a big promise? Well, that's the easy part, right? The hard part is keeping the promise over time. I think about a brand like Facebook, right? They got caught sharing all this information in the Cambridge Analytica scandal. I think they paid like a $5 billion fine, but most importantly, a lot of people still don't trust them today. So the brand you have to figure out something that's really important. You have to have a logical connection between what your product is and actually helping people to achieve some of that. And then most importantly, you have to religiously keep that consistent over time. And if you do that, then the brand can grow and the brand can provide a lot of value to a lot of people.
And if you don't, you break trust and people disengage. And I remember, just as another example, I'm a pastor of church, Chase Oaks Church, and our brand is come as you are, right? And you can bring your friends no matter how far they are from God, and this will be a place where we're going to point to truth and we're going to affirm what Jesus affirms, but in the context of grace. We're not going to, there's no shame. It's, we're just like Jesus taught, he's full of grace, full of truth. The order is important. And he accepted people full of grace and pointed to truth. So you just know, I didn't vet a guest speaker well enough, and he came he broke that promise, and was very shaming, including those and even those who had been abused as kids, and like shamed them for some not handling something. But so it was terrible. And unfortunately, I wasn't there until the last service. And otherwise, he would have only been there for one service. And you can't find this if you go on our website to try to find the talk. It's the only talk we've taken down, never to be seen again. But it was such a violation, and I knew it was a violation. But in the weeks and days ahead, it was such the depth of betrayal that people felt. Was so deep, because there were so many people who've been hurt by church, and they were there themselves, and they thought we were different. And now they know you're not different. You're just like every other church. And I knew it was coming, and here it is, or man, I brought my friend who, and it was awful, so, and then we were in a mode of trying to restore trust because we had broken it. And we did through all our small groups. I wrote this discussion guide, they could take it deeper. I got up and said, I was wrong and I'm sorry. And I should have not have gotten this. I shouldn't have allowed this to happen. And I'm the leader, and I did. But we got through it. But it was, I think the more important the brand, the more important the promise, and the deeper sense of violation there is. And I think that's what we're dealing with right now. I mean, the world's most important brand, it's the depth of the violation is just huge. But the opportunity to regain trust is also significant.
Mike, I want to go back to something that's really like brand and marketing specific. I think when I was reading the book, you talked about something that I'd never heard of before, Net Promoter Score. Yeah. So can you tell us what that is?
Sure. So Net Promoter is something that's come, I want to say it's probably 20 years old now, but it's become really, really popular in the last maybe 10 years. And it's just it's a metric that brands use. In fact, a lot of brands would tell you that it's their most important metric, more important than sales or profitability or whatever. It was invented originally at Bain & Company, which is a consulting company in the early 2000s. And what it attempts to do is measure how people feel about a brand. And the theory behind it is this, that we live in an age in which there's media saturation and people are hugely skeptical. You can advertise a lot, and that's good, but people tend to be, skeptical. And you could say that probably the most important media or the most important messaging you could give today is somebody who uses your brand or product, likes it, and gives a favorable review to somebody they know, right? People value that a lot more than they would value, let's say, an ad that they saw. So there's a single question that's asked, and the question is basically, would you recommend this brand to a friend? And you don't just say yes or no, you answer on a scale from 0 to 10. And what the research has found is that people who will put a 9 or a 10 are actually very likely to tell somebody about it. People who answer 0 through 6 are probably more likely to say something negative or sort of a meh kind of an answer, and 7 and 8s are considered neutral. So interestingly enough, even people who put a 7 or 8 probably aren't excited enough to actually go talk to their neighbor about it. So what you do is you add up all the people who say 9 and 10, you get a number, how many out of 100, and then you add up the 0 through 6 and you subtract that from it. So the net is the positives minus the negative, and it gives you a score. What's interesting about the Net Promoter is that obviously theoretically you can get a score of 100. Everybody loves your brand as a 9 or 10 and tells you about it. But there's a lot of brands, including a lot of big brands that we all know, where the net score is actually a negative. And it means that there's more people saying bad things about the brand than there are positives. And over time, a lot of research has been able to correlate Net Promoter Score and changes in Net Promoter Score to brand regard, brand growth, brand profitability. So it's become a really important metric. I think it's really good because it brings companies and brands away from this sort of internal, how much sales did we grow, how much money did we make, and more sort of, okay, but what are people actually saying this about us? And it's a wonderful lead indicator of what's going to happen in the future.
Give me some examples. What are some examples of companies that have very different Net Promoter Scores?
Yeah, really good question. So in our research, which was not exhaustive, but we looked at hundreds and hundreds of brands, the brand that we found with the lowest NPS score is Comcast, and I think most people know Comcast, the cable company. By the way, it was negative, and it's been negative for years. And obviously that means more people are saying negative things than positive. You can, literally if I say Comcast, people go, oh, we'll be there between noon and 6 p.m., so wait around all day, and then we'll probably show up late or not at all, right? So that's why there's negative. The brand that we found with the highest NPS was the brand Tesla. In fact, it was in the high 90s, which is actually almost unbelievable. This means that basically everybody who owns a Tesla is so pleased with the brand that they're telling other people about it. So it's really interesting to see that. And sometimes you'll see some of these brands out there. Patagonia is another good example, which it's not a huge brand that everybody's heard of like Tesla, but it's got a wonderfully high NPS. And what that means is it's kind of rare for you actually to see advertising from a company like Patagonia. They're like, look, we're investing in our product, we're investing in our people, and we used to call it word of mouth advertising, kind of in the old days. But it can be really powerful, and you can see such powerful differences between brands.
So what do you see? Are there some common denominators between companies that have, obviously Tesla and Patagonia are very different, very different product. Yeah. Are there commonalities between companies that have really high NPS?
Yeah, good question. I think so. I would say really two things. There's probably more, but the first one is a really serious commitment to the promise, right? In the from a business perspective, right? The question kind of comes down to if you have a quarter of the year where sales are a little soft or whatever, what do you do? Do you cut quality? Do you cut service? Or do you have this sort of almost borderline irrational commitment to the promise? Like, we're not going to do anything that will compromise it. We might make less money, but we understand that over time the most important thing is to deliver that promise. And Patagonia is actually an example we use in the book. And interestingly enough, one of the things that they did that was pretty interesting, they used to give 10% of their profits to their cause, right? Mm-hmm. And 10% of profit is a pretty good number. And then they changed it over time to 1% of sales, which actually was a pretty similar number. But the rationale was, even in a year in which we don't make any profit, we'll still be making a donation. So what that showed was that the commitment to the cause was more important than even their profitability. And you obviously have to have a lot of shareholder buy-in to do this. The second thing I think is transparency, being transparent about what's going on, because brands with high NPS don't always get it right, but they tend to always be honest about it. And I think people can be very forgiving about that, just because you're just like a friend. Hey, here's what my commitment is to you. I blew it. I'm sorry. Here's what I'm doing differently. And almost any of us would say, hey, that's okay. And that's what the relationship with a high NPS brand is like.
So what do you think it is that companies understand about branding and reaching their customer that the church is missing?
Yeah, I think I would probably go back to those same two things. First of all, I would say not a lot of companies truly understand this. I think there's a handful of really, really great brands in the world that are high NPS and really consistent over time. And I would certainly aspire for the church to be one of those. So the first one is this sort of commitment to the promise. And you can imagine in the world of the corporate side how easy it is to get distracted from the core promise towards, what's my profitability this year or quarter or so on. But in the same way, and Jeff can speak to this, there's a lot of distractions in the church world that could pull you away from it too. Mm-hmm. And then I think the second one is continuing to be transparent about that, not obfuscating when there's a problem or blaming it on somebody else or denying the problem. All you have to do is turn on the TV anytime that any politician is talking, if you want to see people who will deny that there's a problem and blame it on somebody else. And so people are so cynical about that. I think just speaking the truth.
Yeah. So Jeff, that makes me think about the story that you just told about when that speaker came, and you could have easily ignored it. You could have just not acknowledged it, not apologized, not sent out the study guide. What was it that made you decide, like, no, I'm going to address this, like,
head on?
Head on. There you go.
Head on.
I felt the internal violation myself. I mean, I was listening, just, I sitting there thinking, should I go up and stop it right now?
Wow.
It was that strong. And then I didn't. I should have, actually. But, then when I saw just the feeling of betrayal and all that, we have such a strong brand promise that we violated that it felt like the only thing to do was to acknowledge that and to say, that is not who we are. We made a huge mistake. We're going to do everything we can to where nothing like that ever happens again. But it just happened, and we're sorry. And people did, like to what you just said, people were very forgiving of that. And I think if we just tried to move on or tried to smooth it out, or I don't know what we could have done, it would have there would have been backlash and departure and all that kind of stuff, because it was such a big violation of our brand promise.
Do you remember how the church responded? Did people leave after that speaker?
A few, but mostly not. But people reached out. I mean, I don't know everybody, right? But people who reached out to me were, I called them, and just and some of them I met with in person. Some of them I called, and everybody I called, everybody I talked to, be like, hey, look, I get it. It's just, this is my friend, and I invited her. And it's just such a bummer because I don't know if I'll ever get her back. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. And I'd love to talk to her too if she ever wants to talk, that kind of thing. Most people were super understanding. That's what I remember. And it was actually an opportunity to connect, to connect with people I never would have connected with otherwise in it as well. But that's what I remember.
So if Christianity is a brand, a really important brand with some huge brand promises, but a brand nonetheless, then we need to ask, does the Bible tell us what the brand is supposed to be, or are we just making it up as we go? The truth is, Jesus gave us the brand. He told us what it is, and he modeled for us what it looks like. And while the brand is difficult to maintain, it's not complicated or difficult to understand. We're going to talk about that in the next episode of Rebranding Christianity.